Hi, good morning. Welcome everybody to the Mesa City Council study session for November 30th, 2023. Mayor Giles is out of town and he is excused from this meeting. All other members of the council are present. I see Mr. Summers is online. Councilmember Summers?
I'm online, thank you.
Perfect. Thank you. We have several presentations, but we want to review first. Item one is to review the agenda we have for Monday, December 4th. Any council members have questions? Comments? Mr. Brady?
Yes, just this came up. Item 5C will be removed from the agenda. The contractors asked that be removed.
Item 5C. Okay. Anything else? Any questions, comments? Councilmember Goforth?
Yeah, I do have a question on 4B, the increase to the leasing. My question is about year 3, the contract for year 3. I know we have the Department of Housing Funds, which increases the number of rooms for year 2, and year 3 says upon administrative approval. How does that work? Is that assuming we get more funds from the Department of Housing, it increases to year 3, or? And I apologize, I wasn't here July 3rd when this was discussed.
Right. So, good morning, Council. Yes, so the contract that we have with the Windermere Hotel is on a calendar year, not on a fiscal year. The grant that we received from the state is on a fiscal year. So we're actually having to amend the 2023 calendar year contract with Windermere. That has an administrative renewal that we can do. So when we renew, it doesn't have to come back to council. We can renew it administratively. It would renew into 2024.
But the funding's available.
But the funding's available. All funding is available for this contract.
Okay, through the extra Department of Housing funds?
Correct.
Okay.
Correct, but because the housing funds are straddling to calendar years, which is what the contract is, we'll have to add them to the 23 contract and then administrative renew them for the 24 contract.
Okay,
The timing of the funding and the contracts.
yeah, okay. Okay, thank you.
All right. Any others? Hearing none. Item 2A is the presentation and update on Mesa's Integrated Water and Wastewater Master Plan. We have staff here to present. Thank you.
Okay, good morning, Vice Mayor, Council. We're here today to talk about an update, give you an update on our Integrated Water Master Plan. Actually, it's our water, wastewater, water resources, reclaimed water, everything. That's why we're calling it integrated. It's across the board look at all our business areas. I'm here today with Spencer Taylor. He's supervising engineer, and he's taking a lead role with our consultant and our team on the master plan work. So we're gonna start out with this general plan slide. So we're here to talk about the integrated master plan, but we need to talk about the general plan because, as you know, we're also working on that along with the master plan, and these really go hand in hand. They're a little bit different documents. The master plan is more technically oriented, so there's a lot of charts and graphs and modeling, and it gets into a little bit more analytical look at things. Also, the master plan takes a really deep look at existing conditions and existing infrastructure, whereas the general plan is a little more visionary, but these really are linked closely. So we have to mention that we're working on that too. So these bullets are some of the high areas that are featured in our work on the general plan, but they're also linked to the master plan. And we're gonna talk a little bit more about the work in the master plan, how it relates to these bullets and ties back to the general plan. So we first need to start talking about people, because if you're talking about work in the master plan or the general plan, it doesn't matter what kind of goals or objectives you set. None of it matters if you don't have high quality people and highly trained people. You just can't get things done. I'm not going to go into each of these bullets, but I think all the departments sitting behind me, as well as ourselves, are all going through the same kind of challenges right now with the workforce and trying to recruit quality staff, retain staff. So you really have to think outside the box, and that's what we're doing right now. And we're having some success with these initiatives. I think we're making some good ground, especially getting people to understand why their job's important and purpose and how it affects our customers. That's all really important. So we're making headway there, and I know talking from other departments, they're having similar successes too. So we're going to transition from there. I'm going to turn it over to Spencer, and he's going to start talking about some of those higher level concepts and how we work through those in the context of the master plan.
So, good morning, Council. In our master plan, we take kind of a long-term look at our facilities, water production and sewer facilities, and future water demands and projected sewer flows. The goal there is to make sure that our existing facilities are sized correctly today, but then also sized correctly in the future. An example of this is the Greenfield Water Reclamation Facility. In 2018, the next projected expansion of that was going to be 10 MGD, a big expansion for Mesa. This current water master plan, we've reduced that expansion by 80%. Just understanding the future flows that we're going to have, we're able to be efficient and make sure we right-size that infrastructure, that facility. So that's looking at existing facilities. This slide, we're kind of looking more at future facilities. The master plan identifies those water demands and flow, sewer flows in the future. And one area that we're focused on heavily is Southeast Mesa. We need a lot more well capacity in that area based on the master plan. This map that you can see on the slide here shows where we're going to have future well sites. We may not be drilling some of these well sites for 10, 15 years, but we want to be able to plan for those sites and work together with developers so that we're not impacting their development, and then also saves the city money on those well sites.
Before development gets to those locations, we try to identify those sites ahead of time.
Absolutely.
Right.
So,
It's
yeah.
much more challenging if you wait too deep in a development process or as that growth has already occurred. It's really hard to go in and ask a developer to sacrifice an acre and a half for us. But if we do it well, that's still an open field and they haven't even developed any plans yet, it's much easier to have that conversation and get that property.
So for example, when Eastmark was making their plans, we started having those conversations early on before they started building. So.
And it requires work with a lot of departments to make that coordination happen.
Got a question?
And I'd just like to tailor on to that. I think it behooves us as a city to drill our well sites ahead of schedule and timing, that we know that we're going to need that water. And, you know, like you said, Chris, is finding those areas, you can drill a well today and still utilize it, 5 or 6 or 8 years from today. Typically, you can do that if you do the right structure to the well and anticipate the aquifer. So, I'm all in favor of drilling it, getting the land today, and then drilling wells as we have monies available and prepare for the future that way.
And right now you have, how many actively pursuing right now? You have quite a few, right?
Well, our plan over the next decade is going to be over 20 to 25 wells, and we have 5 to 10 already in some stage of it. Either we just drilled them, we're getting ready to drill them, the consultants are on board doing the design of the wells and the collection lines. So this is going to go on for a decade.
Oh, yeah. And SRP's already doing that today. They're drilling wells in areas to anticipate recovery, the long-term storage credits if needed, as well as other well
Exactly.
water.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, thanks.
And
That's just to maintain, 20 of them over the next decade, just to maintain that 8% of the total water needed? Is that what you're saying? Or is that assuming it's
No, correct.
increasing?
Councilmember Goforth, because if you look at the later bullets of the slide, we are only doing 8%, meeting 8% of our demand with groundwater. We plan on staying below 10%. But there's other important purposes for the well field. It's Like right now, the Val Vista water treatment plant is down for maintenance, so we have to turn on wells. And then Signal Butte, that could go down for maintenance in the winter, we turn on wells. Or if there's, we want to meet peak demand, that peak hour July demand, we'll turn on some wells. So wells are really for resiliency and backup.
Just a process on, do we purchase the site of the wells, or I'm assuming, some of the wells that we'll be using will be private property, so do we?
We have to
Yeah, we
acquire them.
we
yeah.
acquire them, right? Okay.
Get the right of way to get, and the access to get to them. It's a fun process.
Right, in recent years, Vice Mayor Heredia, in recent years, it's almost an ongoing set of meetings that we have internally with right-of-way in terms of just long-range planning and what developers do we need to make contact with. And because it's not just one discussion and we have the property, it's a series of discussions, and it is a process. So it's almost a side full-time effort.
Okay. Councilmember Duff?
It's not about supply, but in some National League of Cities, EENR, Energy and Environment and Natural Resources, we've talked a lot about PFAS, and some of the well sites are near the airport. Is there any concerns about that? Has the water been tested, that kind of thing?
Sure, Councilmember Duff. We're certainly concerned, just like every city, because, in fact, I read an article this morning about PFAS and the legislation that's coming that will set a bar at about 4 parts per trillion for about 6 different PFAS compounds. So the way the federal government has everybody being proactive and looking at that is it's called UCMR 5, Unregulated Contaminant Monitoring Rule, 5th version of this. And there's a set of, it's not just PFAS, but there's a set of compounds that we have a 3-year window to test all of our wells and our plants. And we're about a year into it already. And so far, to our surprise and to our elation, we've been not finding PFAS. So we still have more to do. Actually, we've moved some wells up because there's a lawsuit against some of the manufacturers that make some of these compounds. And we wanted to move some up just to see if we'd be affected and we could be party to that lawsuit. So we're actually probably more like halfway through our wells, and we're just not finding PFAS. Even there's one by Gateway Airport. I don't know if we've sampled that one yet, though. But we've been fortunate, because I was just at a conference, and some of the East Coast cities, they have it everywhere. So they have a lot more daunting road ahead than we do, fortunately.
Yeah, I know. Airports, military airports are one of the areas that it's often concentrated, so I just wanted to inquire.
Right, it's the firefighting foam.
Yeah, thank you.
So as part of our coordination with the general plan and making sure that our existing infrastructure is resilient and efficient, we have a robust pipe inspection program. Our pipes are all buried in the roads. They're hard to get to. We can't see them. So we try to inspect the critical pipes, large diameter pipes, on a regular basis. This slide shows a picture of one of our field coordinators inside one of the 36-inch pipes, potable water pipe. During one of these inspections, they found some defects that had to be repaired before it got put back in service. But fixing these small defects allows us to have these pipes in service a lot longer, and in the long run saves us money replacing these pipes ahead of schedule. And to determine which pipes are critical, obviously size is a big factor, but we also have hydraulic models that allow us to show which pipes we need to have a certain capacity out of to serve our customers.
On that end, quick question on, do we use like robots? I remember going to ASU, Polytechnic, and SRP was using like robots to scan the pipes, and what's like the capacity on that innovation that we have for the city?
So we use a number of different technologies. We do send robots into the pipes. It can be expensive, so we try to reserve those for specific pipe material. And critical or old pipes. But that is an option that we are using on a regular basis.
Yeah, we have technology for the smaller mains, the 8-inch mains. We have leak detection technology. It's acoustic-based, and we have a full-time crew that goes around the city, and then they set up on the valves, and then through the sound waves, there's a signature that would be correlated with a leak, and it's really effective. And we do that section by section of the city on our own, but these bigger transmission mains, that's where we want to call upon vendors that have more specialized equipment, and that gets expensive, so we're selective, and we have an ongoing program every year. There's not a year that goes by that we don't have several miles of this backbone infrastructure planned to look at very closely. Because if one of these breaks, we're all going to know about it. It would be a serious failure.
Sure.
So this slide shows a map of our sewer pipes in blue with pipes that are at or above their design capacity in red. And this is developed from one of our hydraulic models in conjunction with our consultant, and helps us to know where we need to focus money, where we need to do either more investigation or kick off projects to make sure that we don't have any issues with capacity. This map is specific to wastewater, but we do similar analysis for the water system. We have a lot of pipe, and again, it's buried, so it's hard to know where to focus our attention. We've got 1,750 miles of pipe in our system. To put that in perspective, to drive 1,750 miles from this building, you could get to Wrigley Field in Chris's hometown of Chicago. But it's a lot of pipe, and so
I'll take Southwest instead.
So the master plan effort is trying to help us manage all of this data and focus on those areas where we can do the most.
And before we leave existing, so we're going to talk about how we look at the future. So we've been talking about existing infrastructure. Before we leave that topic, and losing my train of thought before we go to the future. Okay, when we do the master planning, we always have hydraulic models. So we're always looking at those when developers come in and, or we have a project, we have hydraulic models. But the difference when we're doing a master plan is that we worked with the consultant and we dropped in actual flow monitors and our interceptors, dozens of these, because a model is one thing, it's analytical, but the flow in the actual flow in the pipe could be different. So by putting all these flow monitors out in the system, we know exactly what the flow, so we can dial the model into what the real flow is, and now we know it's calibrated. And then we do an exercise like this where we could find those little red lines which show that we maybe don't have capacity, and then we can make those capital projects and plan those out. So I just want to make the point, we always have the model, but the difference here is now we go through the exercise of actually calibrating those models in the field.
So part of how we calibrate those models, how we input this data, is a look at how the city is going to develop in the future. This map shows all the vacant parcels in the city. They're colored by different land use, using existing billing data and consumption data from existing customers. We know what each type of land use is most likely to use, and so we can project out, extrapolate out into the future as if all of these vacant parcels were developed and using water, and that's how we come up with our demand projections and sewer flow projections. So this is kind of the input that goes into those models, those hydraulic models, that we use for master planning efforts, but we also use for operational modeling and engineering as well. So,
Question?
Yes.
I know, if all this was built out today, would we have the capacity, or we're just planning? I mean, like, how big of a lift do we have for the future?
If everything was built out today,
Yeah, according to the land use, would we have the water capacity?
I'd say if it was all built out today, probably not. The way we're planned is to grow into it.
Okay.
One way to look at it is if we try to put all the infrastructure in place today and get all the water supplies we need today, it would be a massive investment that would not be needed. So the ratepayers would take the burden of expenses that just aren't needed until 10 or 20 or 30 years from now. So I don't know if I answered the.
Yeah, so that would be, as far as just, not infrastructure, but water capacity.
Oh, water's different, yeah. If
Yeah.
you're talking about the facilities, we wouldn't build those till they're needed. We try to time those up with
Right.
growth. But as far as and the same thing with water, we've had that chart, council's seen that
Yeah,
chart
we did
before.
it at one
To show that meeting the demand today as well as the future.
So
Okay.
it also depends on the area of the city. So SRP, we're already 100% built out here. We're doing redevelopment, but it doesn't matter. We have a very healthy buffer between what the actual demand is for 30% of the 30-some% of the city and what the supplies are. It's the cap area, it's so different. It's such a different animal. It's all the different classifications that we acquire over time. And we do have a version of that graph later on here. It just shows that stair stepping. It's that constant stair stepping that
Yeah.
stays above and ahead of demand, but not such that we're making so many investments that now we're burdening the ratepayers prematurely,
Yeah.
if that makes sense.
Councilmember Goforth?
So I have so many county islands in my district. Does this assume that all the county islands are within our water service?
Yes, this factors in the county island, so it's all land use based.
Okay.
And we have all the data from each type of land use in the city. We have all the data of how water is consumed with those land uses. So the county's no different. It's part of our water service area, and there's land uses within the county, just like within the city areas.
But they're
So it's the
pretty low
same.
density, right? Not
Yeah, they
high
are pretty
users.
low, yeah.
And
but-
there's
Yeah.
at least one smaller utility that does provide some utility services to some of the residents in that area. Correct.
That is true.
It's not a big account, but there is another utility in that area.
I think the key takeaway, Chris, that you hit on was the fact that the county pockets are very low density,
Yeah.
and the intent is to stay that way
Yeah.
in their eyes.
Just the topography so it wouldn't be a significant.
Oh,
issue
but
for
it
you.
assumes that they are.
We have to make that assumption, yeah.
Okay.
Yes,
okay,
absolutely.
yeah.
That kind of brings us, the discussion we just had, to what do we do with this information? We input information and data into the model, we found some issues, and then this map kind of shows solutions to some of those problems with future pipes. This is a map of just the water system. The bold pipes in red and green show future pipes that we would need to meet all of the future demands that from those vacant parcels as they come online. And that's a process. We try to make sure that projects that we kick off we're not too far ahead of schedule. We try to right-size the facilities that we install. We don't want things to sit idle either, because they tend to break down and we're not using that capacity.
Yeah, and why this is so important from a growth standpoint is the tighter the modeling is and the tighter our projections are growth-wise, the more we right-size our facilities and our infrastructure, or redevelop existing infrastructure. And why that's important is if we overbuild or we're not dialed in like we should be, then that's going to be money that we spend that we don't need to, that then is transferred again, going back to the ratepayers. It's going to ride on their shoulders. So we want to keep rates affordable.
And we should mention, Chris, you're balancing out meeting the new demand with also going back and rehabbing the older parts of the community also, so that we have this balance of maintaining the existing system with also meeting the future demand at the same time.
Right, we didn't talk about it too much in this presentation, but the majority of our rehab dollars is spent in the older parts of Mesa because that's where the older water mains are, and that's where we're doing our water main replacements.
Councilmember Freeman?
And I think to your point, we talk about the Signal Butte Water Treatment Plant. We're planning today for the future. That's why we've allocated funding for that, because we know that the growth is going to occur in that area. And then I think we're talking about two different modelings here. We're talking about future growth and projections on wastewater. But I want it to be known that we do have an adequate water supply in our city to accommodate any infill and future development. Is that correct?
Well, we're correct, and we're going to talk more about that here in the
Okay.
coming slides.
I don't want it to get skewed, but I just want
Right.
it to be known because that's a topic of conversation, you know, all throughout the United States. Thanks.
Thank you. So that's exactly where we're going next. So we talked about how we look at our existing infrastructure for now and long term, how we look at growth, and how we look at yet to be built infrastructure, and how that needs to be planned and programmed. And now we're going to talk about our water resources. So this is something we also examine closely in our master plan. So in terms of our water resources, we're looking at current and future supplies. So this is something we were just talking about. And if you remember, we were here a few weeks ago, we talked about how we're updating our 100-year assured water supply. So that's why the timing of the master plan was so important, because we only do that every 15 years. That's the requirement of the state. Our last designation was 2010. So we want to make sure we've captured everything that has changed since then. And one of those is the long-term storage credits. We've accumulated almost 100,000 acre-foot of long-term storage credits since 2010. So now we're up to over 550,000 acre-feet of different types of long-term storage credits. So that's our savings account, our rainy day fund that we don't want to use, but that's about 5.5 years of water for the entire city, because right now we use about 100,000 acre-foot a year for water supply. So also looking forward, where are our next buckets of water going to come from? We looked at that closely with our consultant in the master plan. There's the raising of Bartlett Dam. In fact, we have a tour we're participating in Monday to go to Bartlett Dam and to look at the infrastructure, look at the lake, the environment, and just to get a little bit more plugged in, because that process is ongoing. We have meetings almost weekly with the other stakeholders. We're participating, we're providing some funding, and we're providing input into the different models to yield this substantial amount of water from this project. Now, it still needs to go through the federal process and design and construction, so it's going to be sometime after 2030. But these projects take a long time, and that's just the nature of how it works. But we're at the table with this. And then we're also at the table with Phoenix and other stakeholders. We share ownership of the 91st Avenue wastewater treatment plant way west of here in Tolleson, right? And there's effluent that goes downriver that we want to make sure that we can capture that. And we're looking at applying the technology for advanced purification. And again, that's a multi-year process, but probably would take place before Bartlett Dam. So that's something we're pursuing as well. And then the conversion, if you look at the top right graphic, you see those ellipses and all that green. So we worked closely with our consultant to look at these pockets in the city. And a lot of these, some are county islands, some are not, but they're all septic. There's a lot of septic in the city, and some are pretty dense, very dense neighborhoods. So the capital, your return on a capital investment to convert those from septic to sewer would not be that high, and we explored that with our consultant. If we were to do all or most of these, that could amount to an additional 2 million gallons a day that we could have. That would be a resource that would go to the treatment plant. We'd recycle that water and become part of our exchange agreement with the Gila River Indian community. So we probably wouldn't do all of that, but I think there's opportunities in the future to do those conversions and get some of that water resource. So these are some of the longer term augmentation options we're looking at very closely.
Chris, on the purification, what's the projection there that they're talking about as far as water that would be available?
Well, Vice Mayor Heredia, so Mayor Gallego in Phoenix, she's leaning on her team pretty hard to set an ambitious goal of about 2030. That's the last figure I heard, so that's not very far off.
And as far as the projection of water, available water that will be purified, I guess, through the process that they will be
Sure.
setting up.
It would be so in total, it would be over 50 million gallons a day. It's a substantial amount of water. So our share of water that runs through that plant that we could convert into purified water would be about 5 million gallons a day. So pretty substantial.
Okay, all right.
And we would not take that water physically because the plant is so far away
Yeah.
The idea is Phoenix would purify that water. They'd have 50 million gallons a day. They'd run it into the heart of their system, and then we would do some kind of trade
Sure.
to be made whole on that.
Councilmember Freeman?
Now, are we participating in the forest recovery program with SRP? I thought we had some ties into that as well, looking at that.
Well, there's some things we're doing with SRP. There's the biomass project. I don't know if you're talking,
That's the same, that's the same thing.
We are. So we've already executed that agreement. We're only in year one. It's a 10-year agreement for that bio. So it's forest thinning, which would have benefits to the watershed.
Okay. And then there's also participate in the conservation space there at Roosevelt when we have extra water there, when
Right.
that's available for our water supply. That's only during, good years or,
Right, well, and we want to
But-
support them on the idea too. Remember, Jim Pratt talked about the water even above that, that's in that
Yes.
flood mitigation element, that if we could hold that instead of having to let it release and go down the river and wipe out, is it McDonald? McKellips. So we're
the
having.
Gilbert Road Bridge.
Yeah, well, but today when they release the water out of the dam, it covers up McKellips, and so you have to
Oh.
shut down McKellips. So the idea if you
Yeah.
could keep that water behind the dam longer, then that could be.
That would have made a big difference this year because Lake Roosevelt filled, all the lakes in the SRP system filled up to 100% in terms of the 100% line. And then they got into that strata that you're talking about, Chris, where they're required to push that water downstream and it's wasted. So the rules are, I'm pretty confident they're going to be put into place, would allow us to have at least some 30, 40-day window to start filling
Yeah.
up that next strata. And then there's a strata above that that's called the protection of dams, so that's your safety area. But if we could go into that one zone a little longer, instead of the SRP system being at like 82% full it is today, it would probably be more like 95% full. So it could be a game changer.
Yeah, it would. So, and then there's the SCIF as well, that's going to be in
Right.
the East Valley. So that'll help
Yeah.
divert water. But yeah, we lost 200,000 acre feet just with the releases this past year. So
We had a good
just
meeting with
think about
SRP.
that.
Sorry, yeah, we had a good meeting with SRP yesterday and asked about the SCIP, and they said that they're really weeks away from getting ready to forward it to the federal government to start the environmental process.
Okay, thank you.
So so we're looking at growth long-term, and we're looking at our portfolio. We talked about different ways we want to augment the portfolio, but there's two parts to those graphs, right? There's the demand, and then there's the supply. On the demand side, there's ways to keep that in check. And some of these graphs we're going to talk about, I think, are really interesting. But with this slide, we're talking about AMI, and we've talked about it before. We did a presentation not long ago about where we're at with that. We completed phase one. Phase two is underway, and we're already up to a couple thousand water meters. They just started, so they're really starting to get some steam ahead of them and make great progress. And I feel like within 3 years, we'll probably have the whole system outfitted. And one of the benefits there, as we talked about, is we could realize up to 2 million gallons a day that is lost today behind the meter. So customers are paying for that water, but it's leaks in their backyard or somewhere on their property they don't know about. And we had a couple of those. In fact, that graph on the bottom was a city property that was in phase one. And almost in real time, we found that something wasn't right and there was a leak. And that would have been a substantial amount of water loss, but we were able to find that because of the software with AMI and go fix that and stop that leak. And if you extrapolate that citywide, you're looking at a substantial amount of water that won't be lost every year. But that, in fact, it's supply, right? If we don't lose it, it becomes supply. And then there's other things. Can we go to the graph? Because I think the graphs start to get pretty interesting. So Spencer's going to talk a little bit about that, and then I'll chime in. But it looks at our historical demand, and then, of course, we look at where we're projecting. But Spencer, why don't you talk a little bit about that?
So this graph shows our historical water demand for the entire city from 1980 to present in orange. And with that, there's a trend line, dotted trend line, linear trend line for the historical demand. And then in green, from the present day out to 2040, which is an assumed build-out year, shows our demand projection for this current master plan, integrated master plan. And what's kind of interesting about the trend line for the historical and our projection is that today there's a big gap, but when we get out to build out, we're pretty close to that projection.
Let's go to the next one. So here's where it starts to get really interesting. So you can see how steep the curve was, the demand curve. So this is citywide, right? And we go back to 1980, and you can see from about 1980 to 2000, that was pretty steep. So yes, we had growth in the city, but the demand really was pretty steep. There was nothing really there to tamp down that demand. People were using a lot more water than they do today. So in that first black line in 2004, that represents when the city was about 2/3 built out. That's what the work with our consultant showed as the projection going forward. And you can see that just goes out into the stratosphere, right? But if you were back in 2004 and you didn't have the luxury of knowing what's happening in the future, you would think, well, that looks pretty accurate. It's pretty close. But things start to happen. So around that time is late 90s was when the plumbing code changed to drastically cut down on the gallons per flush of toilets. That was really one of the most noteworthy things in the plumbing code change. That had a big difference, flattening out demand because people just use less water just because of that. And then in 2005, the EPA launched WaterSense. And WaterSense, you read about it every time you buy a dishwasher or some water-using appliance, a washing machine. The water per cycle, whatever, came down dramatically from that. So these have long-lasting and compound effects, and that brings us to the blue line. In 2010, we do our next master plan. You can see now it's starting to flatten out because we're looking at the flattening of demand from those things I just talked about. But what we didn't expect in 2010 is for water to go down, right? So that our graph in 2010 still starts going up and to the right, but now we're starting to get deeper into this 23-year drought that we're in. So now conservation messaging and people becoming more aware of trying to be conservative with their water use. So all these things just kind of compile and add up, and you can see that there's been a long 20-plus year of really flattening out of demand. So that brings us to present day in our projection, and you can see we're flatter yet. And my estimation is we're going to be even flat. So we update these master plans every 4 or 5 years. I think the next line is going to be even flatter. Maybe not much because now you can see we're 80% build out. So the closer you get to build out, the less uncertainty you have ahead of you. But you can see I thought it was really interesting seeing the progression of how water was used in the 80s up to 2000, and then the next 10 years, and then bringing us to present day. So our conservation messaging, all these things kind of add up. And we're not alone in this. I think all the Valley cities recognize this, and you're going to see similar curves in other cities too. But it was really interesting. Is there any questions on that? I threw a lot at you. Okay.
Great water.
One of the other categories, and probably one of the most in categories, we highlight both in the master plan and the general plan as an objective is 100% beneficial reuse of reclaimed water. And we've talked about this in numerous occasions where 2 of our 3 reclamation plants are already delivering water to the Gila River Indian community, about 10,000 acre-foot a year, and then we get those high priority cap rights in exchange. And then we're under construction. Councilmember Spilsbury is well aware of this. We're under construction. It's proceeding ahead. And in about 2 years from now, that project will be done. We'll be able to double the amount of water we send to the Gila River Indian community in exchange. So that goes back to the conversation about this continual building of our water portfolio. It never ends. We're continually stair-stepping that up. And then not to be lost in the conversation, going back to 91st Avenue, the effluent that is created there is also put to beneficial reuse. Palo Verde Nuclear Power Plant is the only nuclear power plant in the world that uses its cooling water from recycled water. And that a lot of that starts here in Mesa. And then there's other off-takers of that recycled water. So this brings us back. So now we're looking, you've seen this graph or a version of it. This is back to the CAP areas. And you can see just that stair-stepping. What's noteworthy that we want to show you today is just to remind you that in a couple short years, the Central Mesa Reuse Pipeline is going to be done. And after about a year of sending them that increased flow, then we'll be able to realize that in our portfolio. So we're showing starting in 2027, that first building block, right, the green, that doubles in size, and then that pushes everything up. And we're not even showing on this graph, we're showing some of those other augmentation sources that we're exploring, Bartlett Dam and the purification of 91st and the septic areas. We're not even showing that on top of that. But in future master plans, you're going to start seeing those pile up on this graph too. One thing we wanted to share with you, I had the honor of attending a conference in San Diego last month. We were one of 6 utilities to be awarded the Sustainable Water Utility Management Award. So it was a great honor to us. And it's a series of awards that starts with the Gold Award that we won in 2013, and then the Platinum we won in 2016, and then finally here in this year, we won this award. So it was an honor, and we're going to bring that to our the city meeting we have. It was the mid-managers, and it has a new title.
What's it called, Chris?
It's called Leading the Mesa Way, or something about the Mesa Way.
That's close enough. Meeting the Mesa Way.
Meeting the Mesa Way. Well, we're excited about it.
Oh, yeah.
And
Sounds like it.
and we're bringing our award.
Great.
All right. That one's going to cost me.
A reminder there to all staff, right?
I think I know who'll be making a presentation.
Yeah.
Okay, so to wrap this all up, the integrated master plan, it ties everything together. It's water, it's not just water, it's water, wastewater, reclaimed water, and it's a water rights. It's all comprehensive, and it's existing, it's future, it's all tied together. And as a reminder, we do update this every 4 or 5 years. It helps guide the direction of our business in the future. And then also, as a reminder, as we started, it has a very close correlation with the general plan. So the master plan and the general plan, it's no coincidence that we're doing these at the same time because they're very closely linked. And we do want to emphasize that. So that's the end of our presentation, and we're happy to take any questions.
Questions, Councilmember?
I don't have a
Bokor?
question. I just want to say congratulations. That's a big deal
It is.
on the award.
Thank you.
And you all do a phenomenal job, and we are very grateful for that. Our residents are grateful, and I feel very comfortable when I talk to residents about what we're doing with our water supply and the future of the water. So thank you to you and your whole department.
Well, thank you for that feedback, and we'll pass that on for sure. We appreciate it.
Councilmember Spilsbury?
Councilmember Goforth just pretty much stole everything I was just going to say. But water is one of those issues that the more I learn about it, the more I realize I don't know about it. And it just gets more and more complicated the more I learn about it. So I'm still learning and I'm in the process, but realizing how complicated it is and how much goes into me turning on my tap every morning is just incredible that our city is in the position it's in. And so I wanted to thank you also for that. I also feel very confident when talking to people about our future water supply and the way that water is managed in the city. And it's one of the things I'm most proud about for our city. So thank you and congratulations for the award as well.
Thank you. We appreciate, and we appreciate your support as well. It makes our job easier to know we have your support, and it's very helpful. Thank you.
Councilmember Freeman?
Chris, excuse me, thank you. You know, I attended a water conference about 3 weeks ago, and one of the things the experts talked about is the community that exports their water exports their future. So if you think about that. So they also went on to make sure your internal controls are in place. And I think that's what's important that we're discovering here is that we're making sure everything's in place to have an assured water supply for our community. And that's extremely important. The other thing he brought up that he said, if water conservation becomes your future, you may be off track. So you can just not always rely on conservation. You have to have all these different sectors involved in making sure your water supply is there. So those are 2 little snippets that I thought that I'll utilize in future conversations. But again, you know, continued oversight of our water supply is extremely important because without water, we're not going to be here. And that's been evident historically that people left this area because of a drought or whatever happened, you know, 1,000 years ago. And so we're utilizing and leveraging those opportunities to become very resilient in our water supply. So anyway.
Those are great points. Thank you.
You're welcome. No charge.
Councilmember Summers? Comments, questions?
No additional comments, Vice Mayor. Thank you.
All right, thank you. All right, well, thank you, Chris and Spencer.
All right, thank you.
All right, we'll move on to item 2B is a presentation on accessory dwelling units. Mary and Rachel, thank you.
Morning.
Morning.
Good morning, Vice Mayor, Council. Today, we are really pleased to do a presentation on accessory dwelling units and how they're working in the city of Mesa and potential incentives to see if there's a way to provide incentives for property owners to create more ADUs. In our presentation, we'll go through what is an ADU. We'll give a little bit of a background on some of Mesa's current standards. We'll look at a municipal comparison of what other jurisdictions in the area are doing, look at some challenges and opportunities, some potential incentives, and then some potential next steps. So an ADU is an independent living unit on the same property as a primary dwelling. It's accessory to and smaller than that primary dwelling, thus it's called accessory. It can be rented separately, it can be attached, it can be detached, or it can be a converted space, and it can be a stick-framed building, modular, or manufactured. In Mesa, we've actually allowed ADUs since about 1939 from what we can tell from our research. So we've always been ahead in terms of where ADUs are allowed and how we manage them here in the city. The state had proposed some legislation last year, and we had worked really closely with Miranda and her team on this, about they were going to require that municipalities that were over 30,000 had to allow ADUs in any zoning district where residential uses were allowed. They could still regulate height, setback, size, those types of things. So we went and we looked at what our code currently allowed versus what the state was proposing. And really, we only found one discrepancy. We had already met all of the requirements of what the state wanted to do. And that is, we have some zoning districts where ADUs are not necessarily allowed that we would have had to make a minor zoning amendment to. But otherwise, we're either ahead of the state or we were right in line with what they were proposing. In our current ADU standards, ADUs are permitted in any of our single family residential districts, our multifamily residential districts, our downtown residential, and our agricultural zoning districts. Our current standards say that you can have one ADU per lot. It can be attached or detached. It requires a separate entrance to that ADU because, again, it is an independent living unit. It can be rented. It may be accessible from the primary dwelling, and it must be served by water, the same water service as the primary dwelling. In our current standards, again, you have to follow the lot coverage, the maximum height requirements in our code. For required setbacks, the attached ADU, that is, it's attached to your primary dwelling, has to follow the same setbacks as the primary dwelling, but if it's a detached ADU, it follows those of a detached accessory structure. In terms of size, we allow up to 30% of the primary dwelling unit for the size of the ADU, but within the town center redevelopment area and the infill district, it can be 50% of that floor area. And the ADU has to be architecturally compatible with that primary dwelling, again, because we want it to fit in with the neighborhood and the character of where it's being located. Rachel's now going to talk about the comparison we did with the jurisdictions around Mesa to show how we compare with what they're doing.
All right, good morning, Council. So whenever we're looking at, considering text amendments, we like to benchmark with other cities. So I'll go through a series of different requirements. So this first one talks about where cities, if they permit them and what zoning districts they permit ADUs in. So with most of the cities in the valley, they permit them in their single residence districts. And then some are a little more restrictive, such as Tempe, which just allows them in multifamily. But Mesa is a little further ahead than most districts where we allow them in our residential districts, including multifamily, as well as our agricultural and some of our form-based code districts. I think the most kind of comparable one city would be Phoenix to us as far as where they allow ADUs. When we look at the different options, almost all of the cities allow them to be attached or detached, with the exception of Queen Creek that only allows ADUs to be a detached structure. Looking at the size, this really varies across the valley about how different cities regulate the size of these units. Overall, though, they can't exceed the square footage of the main home because they are supposed to be subordinate to that main structure. But as you can see, it kind of varies from 30% of the primary dwelling unit to 50%. The most kind of permissible city, I would say, would be Phoenix, where they allow up to 75% of that primary zoning district to be used. But they also have additional kind of requirements on top of that as far as the lot size as well, to kind of determine as well what the maximum square footage could be. Looking at setbacks, when it's an attached ADU to the home, they just follow the regular setbacks per the zoning district. That's, you know, uniform across the valley. Since Queen Creek doesn't allow attached ADUs, that wouldn't be applicable there. When we're looking at detached units and our setbacks, once again, this kind of varies throughout the valley. We have variable setbacks based on the height of the structure and where it's placed on the lot, which is very similar to what Tempe does. And that actually seems to be the most permissible out of all of these as well. As far as the heights, most cities follow the maximum height for their zoning districts. But then once again, that can be influenced by where that structure is placed on the lot as well, because a lot of municipalities regulate based on where in the lot it's placed and the height that it could be. When we talk about parking, which also is often a subject of discussion, most cities do not require additional parking for accessory dwelling units. The only two that do are Gilbert and Queen Creek that require one additional space. And just for reference, most cities require 2 parking spaces per the primary dwelling unit. As far as rentals, most cities also allow these to be rented out with the exception of Chandler and Scottsdale, Chandler and Queen Creek, I'm sorry. And with Scottsdale, it has to be rented with the primary building. So you can't have a different renter for your primary residence and then a different renter for the ADU. Looking at the approval process for these across the board, it's done administratively. When you see the administrative use permit per Gilbert, that is still an administrative process that's done through their zoning administrator. But then we do have certain districts where you can request different use permits, but that's pretty typical across the valley and would be similar to if you requested a variance from a height or a size. But those go through a conditional use permit process. Pass it back over to Mary now.
Thank you, Rachel. So there are a lot of opportunities and challenges with ADUs, and so we just wanted to list some of those. We know that there's a perceived or a housing shortage here in the city. We've got so this will help to increase our housing supply. It gives smaller units that are probably lower in rents, so it helps us with some affordability. If they fit well within the neighborhood, they can provide some additional density when it's appropriate. It's an additional income source for someone who owns a house and builds an ADU, that can help them with an additional income source. It allows older population to downsize if they want, yet still remain in the neighborhood where they've lived most of their life. Or if you've got children that are looking for a place to stay until they buy their own homes, it's a place where they can live. And it also offers It also offers caretaker options for families. So if you need a caretaker, the caretaker could live in the ADU and then take care of you as you're living in your home. What are some of the challenges? Probably one of the biggest challenges is the cost. And it really is not necessarily the design of the actual ADU but it's the site work, the construction, all of those things. They really can be somewhat expensive for an ADU, as with any home that you're building. It does put additional demands on utilities, as we just had a presentation on water and wastewater. There sometimes is opposition from neighborhoods. They perceive it as suddenly the properties are becoming rental, and why are we renting out within our neighborhoods? And then there's also a possible increase in nuisance complaints, such as there's noise or there's trash and those types of things. So those are some of the challenges that we face with ADUs. So we wanted to look at some potential incentives to see if there's a way that Mesa could try to really provide opportunities for people to build more ADUs. So we looked into our last year's permits and found that last year we permitted 17 ADUs throughout the city. Is there a way that we can increase that number? So what we want to do is present some of those incentives to City Council for discussion so we can see if there's something that we want to modify in our current code to provide those incentives. So the first is the garage conversions. In a lot of cases, the garages are converted to ADUs, and in our code, you'd currently have to replace that parking. So one of the things is, as covered, one of the things that the City Council could consider is, do we replace that parking but not require it to be covered? So that's one of the things City Council could consider. The non-conforming structure conversion. So this would allow homes and existing accessory structures like a shed or a detached garage that don't have conforming setbacks to allow them to convert into an ADU. And that would not, and they would not have further reduced setbacks to adhere to all of those other standards. So that's one of the other things that the City Council could consider. We could increase the ADU home square footage ratio. As Rachel had mentioned, we currently have a 30% ratio. We saw in Phoenix they have up to 75% from the primary structure. And we could put a cap on that of, say, 1,200 square feet. So if you have a massive house and you go 75%, we might not want that as an ADU. So we could put a cap on that. And then we would maybe still not require that they exceed the overall lot coverage. But what this does is it helps a lot of the smaller infill homes to be able to increase the size, excuse me, of the ADU that they may be able to put onto their lot. So this is something, again, that the council could consider. We could allow factory-built units as ADUs. So a factory-built unit is those that are built in a building off-site and then brought to the site and placed onto the site, and they're assembled there. It does meet all the requirements of the state building code, so it is a building. It's a modular home. We have them throughout the city. This is one thing that we could consider as an incentive. And then the last incentive that we wanted to talk about is the potential to develop permit-ready plans. So this would be plans for different sized ADUs and style so that people could take them off the shelf, modify them specifically for their properties. We could set up a dedicated web page so that it was really easy for people to be able to find this information. And then it could help to maybe expedite their process more if they use those approved plans from start to finish with the construction. So those are some of the incentives that we could look at. And so we look at our potential next steps really are, after we receive feedback from the council, is to go to the Planning and Zoning Board for their input, do community outreach. We would then draft our code, the draft text amendments to come back to council, and then come back with that to a study session. And with that, we're happy to answer any questions.
All right, questions? Councilmember Spilsbury?
On the 30% of the primary dwelling, that's including like porch area, garage area, or is it just the living area?
Vice Mayor Heredia, Councilmember Spilsbury. So that includes the square footage of the home. So it includes the garage, but not a covered porch.
Okay, because I think I've heard that that's maybe one of the problems, or just that you're limited on the size that you can do because of counting garages and stuff like that.
Yeah, we
looked
do
at?
include garages. We did a recent text amendment where we changed how we measured them. It used to be per the roof area, but that was kind of confusing for property owners to figure out because there were lots of details about you couldn't include the overhangs and various aspects like that. So it's just based on the square footage of the home, but that doesn't include covered porches or
Okay, so
patios.
one of the things we are looking at, though, is increasing that percentage of this primary dwelling.
That would be an
That is one
option,
of the
yes.
things, yeah, okay. Okay, I think that's all I have.
I have a
Councilmember
question.
Goldberg?
So can you kind of explain where the 30% came from? I mean, what's the idea behind the 30%?
Vice Mayor Heredia, Councilmember Goforth, I can't tell you what the history on where that number came from, but that has been in the code for quite a while. So it's intended to be subordinate to the main structure, but that was the number that's been in there for quite a number of years, except for in the downtown redevelopment area, we do allow up to 50%.
Interesting, okay.
Question?
Well, I was just going to say, I mean, I think all your suggestions are great. I think the benefits outweigh the challenges for ADUs. I don't get a lot of questions about them in District 5 because I have mostly HOAs, which would restrict it anyway. But the conversations I have had with people who live in areas where they can, or developers who would like to do it, I think one of the areas that really could be beneficial is streamlining the process and making it more templated, for people, because that's confusing and hard for the layperson who would like to do that. So to me, I would put emphasis and importance in that area as well. So those are my thoughts.
Councilmember Duff?
This is like one of the most exciting days that I've had. I think since the day I was on council, I'm like, what about those ADUs? We really need to do ADUs. And now with our housing crisis, this certainly is a great way to be able to add to, have affordable homes, which could, because of the small scale, and be in neighborhoods and naturally integrate more housing options I have an ADU, my parents are aging, and I'm looking out after them. I'm so, happy to be able to do that. And I think with, especially the housing costs, we all have family and different arrangements in which multiple families are living together now. And so this is a way to really do it in a respectful way as far as in our neighborhoods. So thank you for doing this work. Of course, I love all the incentives. I have a few additional questions. Looking at some older requirements, there, at one point I was thinking it was required to have a separate electric meter. That's not required. You can run it off the same meter, because unfortunately I have to run 2 meters.
Vice Mayor Herrera, Councilmember Duff. There's nothing in the code that talks about the electric service, but it does say that it has to be served by the same water service as the main home.
So all the utilities can run on the same structure. You don't have to meter separately.
Yes, we actually require that the water run off of the main home so that they couldn't have separate services.
Electric, gas, whatever. Okay, that's wonderful. Do we allow?
I don't know, do we know if that's the same in the SRP territory?
Oh, I don't know.
As far as
I was just
electric.
thinking, I don't know if we can speak to the electric. Do we know if that's how
Well-
SRP looks at that?
I'm not sure about the electric in general because the zoning code
Yeah.
doesn't address
So
it.
let's come back, because we could speak to our electric, but I don't know, when you talk about the whole city, I don't know where SRP is on that, or whether it has to be separately metered or it's one. I would think one would make sense, but I don't know.
I mean,
I've heard that you have to have a second power unit, like that's one of the
Okay, I
issues.
don't know.
So
I just
that's
didn't
why
wanna-
I would like clarification on that as
Yeah,
well.
we can look into that.
I don't know why,
the
but
answer.
I have 2 units and 2. But, whether you add a few hundred square feet onto your home versus having a separate unit, I mean, the impact, I don't understand why you have to separately meter, but that's a different argument. We're not there. We're not talking about that right now. So, pre-approved plans, I think it's really good, because if we had some pre-approved plans, we could probably encourage a community bank to get involved, and they could say, given that you can qualify and you get the permitting on this, it would be an easier financing for people to, get financing for an ADU, because that's a challenge right now. There are permit fees, right, for,
Yeah, someone's gonna
That
have
is
to, yeah,
correct.
absolutely, yeah.
okay, and so if we can streamline that process as much as possible, the average person, it's difficult to apply for a permit and go back and forth with the planning department to understand and get it resolved. In fact, even if some recommendations on ADUs is if there's a point person within the planning department that handles those calls and is versed in ADUs, it makes it easier rather than, a resident trying to explain the situation again and again and get it resolved.
And Councilmember Duff, so we actually, it's done administratively just through building permits, so they don't have to come through for planning approval on these. As long as they're
Okay.
meeting all their code requirements, it just gets reviewed by a plans reviewer through
It's
a
just that if
permit.
it's a do-it-yourself kind of project, sometimes that's the challenge, right? Because they do have to still follow the code, and a resident doing it may not be familiar, but we can work with them. And
Yeah.
John Sheffer and the plan review, the building review folks we can work on that.
Yeah, and initially, when people consider it, they have a lot of questions about what's allowed and what
Absolutely.
can
We
I
want
do.
to make sure they get consistent
Yeah,
information.
and have
Yeah,
consistent
that's
and
fair.
easy
That's the
information,
point. Yeah.
and I think it would be. Do we allow above garage additions? Oh, we do? Okay, I know my neighbor, I do, but it's form-based code. Okay, all right, that's good. What is RM5? I need to look up. There was a thing on the zoning.
That's our most, Vice Mayor Heredia, Council, that's our most dense multifamily residential
Okay.
district.
And so, okay, except RM5. I think that's about it. I will look over some more ADU guidelines that I have. AARP has some municipal guidelines, and you've looked at that? Wonderful. I just remembered this morning, and then I was trying to read it real quick, and I'm like, oh. So that's good. And once we get past this, then we can look at some infill incentives in our neighborhoods, a lot of vacant small lots, whatever we can do to make it cost-effective for people to be able to build small infill lots in neighborhoods. That would be wonderful. Thank you.
Councilmember Freeman.
Thank you, ladies, for the presentation. I really enjoy this. You know, having served on the Board of Adjustment for several years and talk about the non-conforming structure conversions, as you know, is a big issue in our community because code complaints get turned in. Oh, I converted my garage drive into a home. So I think this streamlines the process and allows, you know, without requiring the special use permit. I think that simplifies the Board of Adjustment side of it, right? I think it'll do that. And
Waited.
Yeah, streamline. That's the
Yeah.
best way to streamline.
having experienced that personally and then watching, you know, some of the other Board of Adjustment meetings, it's very, weighs heavily, I guess, on the Board of Adjustment membership, you know, having to make that informed decision based on staff input. The thing I wanted to ask a question on the historic districts. You didn't mention that, how they apply to historical districts. Do they have to comply not only with what we're talking about, but then there's a historical component on top of that, correct?
So Vice Mayor, Council, the biggest challenge there will likely be as it relates to the design. So if we did the pre-approved plans and had different elevations, it would be making sure that it's compatible to be able to get that certificate of appropriateness in those historic districts so that it fits within the architecture fits within that district. But the setbacks and those types of things.
That's all standard?
Yeah.
Okay. I know I had someone reach out to me in a historic district and said, could I put a Zenny home in the historic district, like in the Temple Historic District? And I go, no, I don't think architecturally that would even fit in.
So Vice Mayor, Council, it would be more challenging. I think one of the things that we'd have to look at is where it was placed on the lot, what historic district it was in. Could you see it from so there's a lot of things that go into looking at that certificate of appropriateness.
Okay.
So what I would recommend is that if they came in to planning, we could look at where they're looking to place that on the lot so that we could see if it's something that could fit in, because if it's hidden, maybe.
Well, I think the planners who look at this need to be aware of between the two different levels, whether historic and all the other things required of that. On the electrical meter, I just met with my electrician because I'm going to do a similar thing. You can have your own private meter separate of the SRP meter. So you can have your SRP meter, have a sub panel, have your own personal meter on there to run your casita or your ADU, or you can have 2 SRP meters, if you so choose.
So Vice
So there's
Mayor,
option.
Council, I think sometimes people who put in ADU would want that type of thing so that they knew what the electric bill is from the ADU versus their personal. But again, that's something, we'll do some additional research to see how the electric meters work.
It may not be necessary, but the other issue is water consumption, between your ADU and your personal home or however it's set up. That's the thing you may not be able to manage unless you can put an inline meter off your private line to determine water supply to an ADU
I
or
think it just
whatever.
gets complicated if it's way in the back of that yard, and how do you get that service line back?
Yeah, yeah, you don't want to do that, it'd be too
Right, that's what I'm
costly. But you can put an inline meter, water meter, but with that said, I really like everything here. I think that I don't particularly care for the 30%. I think it should be higher to allow, we have different sized properties in our city, and that allows flexibility for the user. If they want to put 30%, let them. If they want to put 75%, I think that's appropriate based on their lot size.
Vice Mayor and Council, I think the one thing clarification I would ask is, we did put, I recommend a structure up to 1,200 square feet for the ADU. Is that something you'd want to put a maximum, or just the 75%?
I think that's for discussion.
Yeah, and what, can you give us justification for that, sort of the background? Why, where's 1,200 come from, why?
So Vice Mayor, Council, 1,200, you can get a pretty good-sized 3-bedroom house in 1,200 square feet. So this would allow for an ADU that could house a smaller family, but it also, it allows that you can go up to that 1,200 square feet. You wouldn't have to do that. So what it would do is it would cap it so that you could still have a structure that did that, yet you would still be able to go higher than that 30%. So the 1,200 comes from just what that 1,200 square feet could house.
What are we trying to avoid with capping it?
I can answer that.
Go ahead.
So one of the things we're trying to avoid is because it's supposed to be subordinate to the main structure. And when we get to that size of a typical small home, it's not turning it into a multifamily district where you might have multiple homes on a lot. So still ensuring that it's a small enough size that it's subordinate to that main structure was
What was the
what we were
other
looking at.
cities, what was that chart?
Phoenix has the highest with 75%, but they also cap it per the lot size. So instead of what we proposed as a cap on the square footage overall, they did it based on the lot size.
Yeah, I was going to say, so I have some in where I live.
No,
where
I was just trying to do the
it-
calculation. It could be a big home,
It's a,
75%.
absolutely. Well, and but the ADU is got to be over 1,200 square feet on some, but
Oh, you're
because
saying-
the home is 7,000 or something. So you know what I mean? So I don't know. Yeah, I would like, maybe based on lot size might be a better.
So as you
if
can
what
see
we're-
with Phoenix.
Based on what we're trying to avoid.
With Phoenix, the largest they could get was 3,000 square feet if they had a lot that was 10,000 square feet or larger.
I just add on to that. I mean, I have some large acreage in my district, and some of them are 5,000 square feet on 2 acres. And doing the math at 75%, that's 3,750 square feet for an ADU, which if they want to build that, are they entitled to build that? Are we restricting that with the square footage? I'm just throwing it out there for discussion, because I think we should look at it.
We would be going for the most restrictive to the most generous.
Yeah, and at that point, you're.
Or we split it down
You're
the middle.
avoiding-
Subdividing
yeah,
the
you're
property.
platting, yeah.
But if it's
But-
attached, or if it's attached structure, I don't know. I'm just saying that if
Are
somebody
there any
wants to build.
infrastructure concerns as far as if you have, let's say you have 3,000 square feet, as far as, the service lines that were intended originally for whatever? I mean, is there any concerns or not necessarily?
Vice Mayor, Council, so these are some of the discussions that we'll, once we get the direction from Council, have to continue to have. So we've started the discussion with water and wastewater on this, but once we get a direction, we'd have to get those
Let's move forward with
details.
75%, and then we can figure out if we need 1,200 needs to be maybe moved up a little bit or something like that. But at least we could start at the 7, that's what I'm hearing. We start at the 75%. We got to go to planning and zoning, we need to come back to council. So while we're doing that, we can it's that 1,200 cap, I think, is what we're concerned with. Okay.
And, I'm sorry, I interrupted your time.
No, you're fine. I just think that we need further discussion on
Yeah.
this for direction.
But are we okay moving, at least exploring the 75 and just trying to figure out if that needs a cap or not? Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah, and then I had one additional question, and then it's come up a number of times in my neighborhood, is the homes have detached garages, that's the common part, and there's been restrictions that they can't have an ADU unit, because then that would be 2 detached structures on their property.
Councilmember Duff, so in the code, we do have a requirement or a restriction that your detached structures cannot exceed the square footage of the primary structures. That's probably what is occurring there, is that in combination of the multiple structures, it's exceeding that. But we do allow for multiple detached structures, so you could have a detached garage and an ADU.
And Vice Mayor, Council, this is one of the things we want to look up is to clean up things like that so that we almost treat ADUs separately than detached structures.
Yeah, okay, I'll have to figure out, I once had a plan in, anyway, for a carport and an ADU, I didn't have a detached garage, it had burned down many years ago, historically, and then I said, oh, okay, I want to drive back, have a carport, and the detached, and said, no, you got to make those, that's 2 structures, you have to have 1 structure. Anyway, ended up selling the house, but anyway, we'll cover that later.
Councilmember Spilsbury.
I apologize if you spoke more specifically about this and I missed it, but what exact community outreach are you doing on this?
So we have not set out what that program would look like, but what we're envisioning is doing some meetings in different parts of the city to explain what we currently do, similar to what we just did here with City Council, to get feedback, hear concerns, hear, these are the challenges I've had, I wanted to do an ADU. That's probably what we're envisioning doing.
Okay, because I mean, it's usually like a homeowner-driven thing, right? So it's not really necessarily the development community or whatever
That's right, yeah, you're right.
Right, so you would want to talk to people that are wanting to look at this or,
Yeah,
okay.
which is trying to figure out who's thinking about that right now versus.
Right, right.
We'll try to figure out a citywide kind of notice and then.
Just to make sure the people who are actually looking at doing it or wanting to do
Well,
it
we can
have a
kind of
say
look
in
at the
it or whatever.
applications for ADUs where, if there's a more frequent part of the community where that happens, that may be at least a start.
Sure.
And then I guess I was wondering too, these permit-ready plans, I love what's been said that this could help streamline the process and make it easier for people to be able to do something like this. It seems like there's like a huge variety of ways you could do this. And so like like, are we talking about 20 permit-ready plans, 5? Like, there's just like a lot of different ways to do this type of a.
Vice Mayor, Council, so what we would likely do is have different increments of square footage. So identify, once we look at what the 75% looks like, if we look at a minimum, maximum size of the ADUs, that we would start probably at a low end and try to figure out what our highest end might be. And then they will still have to hire a design professional to modify it specifically for their lot. So they could take that as the base and then add to it or subtract from it based on because every lot is going to be unique. So you're not necessarily going to be able to take this plan and put it on your lot. So we would identify, in my experience in a previous life, we did 400, 700, 1,000 and 1,200 square foot. Okay. So we had 4 of those varying sizes.
Okay, that makes sense. And then a garage conversion would only be considered an ADU then if it has a separate entry. Like if someone's just wanting to convert their garage to a big family room or something, has nothing to do with this.
So Vice Mayor, Council, it's an independent living unit. So it has a kitchen, it has a bathroom, it has the separate entry.
Yeah.
That's correct.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Councilmember Duff.
Yeah, one consideration we need to discuss as a council and the outreach is some municipalities would say it's only owner-occupied properties that would qualify to be able to do ADUs and the concept is if there's a lot of rental homes, this would be an easier way for rental investors to then put additional units, and that might densify a neighborhood too quickly because it's an investment property, it's not a home. So there's a consideration of if we want to restrict that, because when we saw the especially we saw investor groups coming in and buying up neighborhoods. They could quickly convert all of that to multiple units, additional units in the neighborhood, and would that entire neighborhood be densified too quickly? It's not a natural progression of being a homeowner and I want to add an additional space. So that's a consideration also.
And Vice Mayor, Council, if that is something that the council wants us to look at, we can put a requirement to have some type of a restrictive covenant that it has to be an owner-occupied primary or ADU. So the person, if they're older, want to move into the ADU, they could do that and then rent out the primary, or vice versa. We can look at that if that's what council would like us to do.
Did you see much of that, or have you seen much of that in your comparison?
It's happened in other communities, though, I
So,
think.
yeah, so Phoenix actually did propose that in their ordinance. In the end, city council
It
did.
got pushed
It got
back
pushed
big time.
back.
Yeah.
Yeah, so
Could
they
you
did
imagine
not.
investor- Yeah,
It's
yes,
the only one
well,
that's
because they were going away from that, but you could imagine investors coming in and buying all that up and then just start.
Turning them into sober living homes.
I wasn't going to go there.
So so they required owner occupied?
Yes, they do.
Okay,
The
okay.
neighbors wanted that.
Yeah.
Their accountability.
Phoenix did.
I think so.
Okay.
So I think when we actually dug in and looked at what the council did, the staff had recommended that, but in the end, I don't think Phoenix did adopt that. They have, that you have to get business licenses as opposed to that covenant. But that is something we could look at.
Councilmember Duff?
Yeah. I'll ask around to there's been discussions among the other cities and everything, and I'll try to do some research and talk to those other cities and see what their experience has been. It's good and bad. I can see the downside of it, and I can see the good side of increasing our housing, but you don't want to change the character of a neighborhood. You want it to still feel like the neighborhood and not suddenly, within a short amount of time, a few years, changing the character.
By people that don't live there? Yeah.
By densifying it, because it's a good investment.
So Vice Mayor, Council, when we go out to the public, when we go to the Planning and Zoning Board, that's one of the things we can get feedback on.
Councilmember Summers, any questions, comments?
No additional comments, Vice Mayor. I'm interested just to track the progress of this.
Perfect. Mary and Rachel, how many ADUs do we have? Do we know across the city?
Vice Mayor Heredia, we don't know because of how long they've been permitted. So back to our first zoning code, they were permitted in 39. So there's really no way for us to know how many there are.
And you said last year it was around 17 that came in. Do we know, like, last 10 years, how many per se?
Vice Mayor, we do not, but we might be able to pull that data. We'll work with our permitting staff to see if we can get that information.
Okay. And as far as, do any of these, because I know just doing some research, a lot of the costs, like 30 to 40% is this utility kind of work of the actual putting in a unit. Any of these recommendations tackle that kind of process as far as cost-wise to the utility work? I know they're going to have to build this, but I think when you look at 30, 40% of, in addition to, the cost of a unit, it is very costly, right? So I'm not sure what's the feedback that you hear of those 17 people that came in to apply and how they're working through that cost. Or so I just wanted to see if there's anything there to work on that cost as far as our process.
Vice Mayor, that's something I think we're going to have to work really closely with Water Resources to determine if there's any incentive for that type of cost. I don't know if we'd have an answer for that right now. I think separate
I don't know if
utility.
it's
It
our
depends on-
utility,
Yeah.
it's someone, it's the plumber, it's having to run that, get the right kind of fall in the sewer, running that pipe or that connecting to the line. I don't know, from the city-controlled side of things, I don't think it changes it. It's that electrician, that plumber that has to figure out how to get those pipes back to wherever it's situated. we can check, but I suspect that when that, and I could see that could be a big cost, because if you're having
Yeah.
to wiggle around a home and get into the back, it may be just a challenge to
Sure.
trench and put all that piping, put the pipe in.
Okay, yeah, I think detail, because I inquired on a commercial space on figuring out how to add some just office space, but the city did have some processes or things that needed to be taken care of that added additional costs, and so I'm just wondering, there are things that we would require that add additional costs,
Okay.
so
We can
how do
look at
we
that.
streamline those
Okay.
things that make it less complicated, I think? That's just maybe something to look
Okay,
at.
sure.
How do we, what we have internally that is required, and how we can work with the homeowner to make it less complicated, or, oh, I didn't, just have the facts up front.
Okay.
And seeing how that dictates kind of their decision to add a ADU in their property, right? So, any other questions? Councilmember
I
Goforth?
guess I should ask Jim about, in the context of an HOA, how it works. I mean, they can be restricted. HOAs, CCNRs can restrict, even though they may be allowed under the city code.
Correct.
Right?
And
So
so-
at the,
And so we won't be changing that.
Yeah.
So the HOAs have separate enforcement mechanisms, and so you can change the city code, but the
Yeah.
HOA restriction will still apply.
It's like short-term rentals.
exactly. But if they don't have that already,
Oh,
Correct.
if they don't have a restriction on a separate dwelling unit, then
Yeah.
like
Then they'll
anything,
be
I mean,
permitted under
they'll
code.
be permitted. And they would have to go through whatever process they require to restrict it. Okay.
All right. Any other questions, comments? All right, thank you, Mary. Rachel?
Thank you.
All right, we'll move on to item 3, is to acknowledge receipt of various board minutes. As for a motion, Councilmember Spilsbury, second by Councilmember Dove. All in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed?
Aye.
Oh, perfect. Thank you, Councilmember Summers. Motion passes. Item number 4, list of current events and conferences attended. So, council members, Councilmember Spilsbury.
Yeah, last week was Thanksgiving, and we did our big tree lighting ceremony, and was that just last weekend? Yes, it was. Yes, so Merry Main Street. Anyways, I wanted to bring it up just because I am just so impressed with what everyone's doing for Christmas this year in downtown. I should let Jen talk about this, I guess, but it's just so exciting because with the ice skating rink and the movies and the Merry Main Street Market and the tree and Santa at the post and Thursday, Friday, Saturdays of the whole month, like, it's just fun, and it's full of people and kids and the magic of Christmas, and I love what everyone has done to contribute to this. And I also finally got to be in the mayor's show, The Man Who Killed Santa Claus, so I was gonna thank him for that, but he's not here, so that was a fun experience. And Manager Brady also got to be the Grinch in the earlier show, so I hope to see video on that one.
character profiling, I think.
Well, I got bubbles, so I hope it wasn't
Well, see, I
profiling.
think it's perfect.
And then I had the opportunity to go speak at a class at MCC, a civil rights class, which was a really fun experience too. I love talking to our future. And then yesterday, I did my PD helicopter tour ride along, and it was, I had doors on mine, and I'm actually really glad I had doors on mine. We took we went on quite a few calls. We went to a hit and run, and then followed the guy. Anyways, it was a whole thing. But I still felt sick last night from the ride. I didn't throw up, but it was rough. And if we had taken some of those turns without doors, yeah. So anyways, but I wanted to just bring it up because I got to listen to our real time, it wouldn't come out of my mouth. Real-time crime center people with the patrol officers and then the helicopter all working together to find this hit and run. And It was just incredible to like see all the things that we talk about coming into play to make our community safer. And I just absolutely thoroughly enjoyed the experience and wanted to thank Randy, Kirk, and Kevin for the tour and getting to have that experience. I've been waiting for that for 3 years, so you got it a bit ahead of me, but it was such a neat experience. And so I just am so grateful for our police department and everything that they do to make our community safe. So that's it for me. Thanks.
All right. Anybody else? Councilmember Duff?
Yeah, well, of course, Merry Main Street was fabulous, and the lighting of the Christmas tree and kicking that off. And it continues throughout until January. So the ice skating rink Saturday night, our movies, this Saturday is Elf. So there's a grassy knoll out there, and bring the family, and it's right by the ice skating rink. And also we have the Temple Lights. So, and there's all kinds of activities in downtown Mesa. You go downtownmesa.com. There's activities within downtown for Christmas, so it is definitely the holidays in downtown Mesa. The other day, I went to a groundbreaking for Teros Health Cafe. It is for teenagers 12 to 17 for mental health and building relationships and life skills. I'm so glad to have that resource in our city, and they'll be opening hopefully within 6 months or so, I'm not sure, but I'll be talking about that when we cut the ribbon. And they're on South Stapley. I also attended the grand opening celebration for Eco Mesa. It's the most sustainable apartment community ever built in Mesa. It has solar and all kinds of sustainable materials and amenities. And it's right here in downtown Mesa on Pepper between McDonald and Robeson. Also yesterday, I attended the Women Leading Mesa luncheon. It was fabulous. So many women, I guess they were sold out, so not sold out, but it was at capacity for the luncheon. And Deputy City Manager Natalie Lewis spoke with us about her experiences and her journey and her wisdoms, and it was very touching and just powerful. And well, let's save the other remarks when there's an announcement made, formal announcement
Should happen
made.
today.
Okay. But thank you for everyone who put that together. I know it's a lot of work, and Natalie, you're very special. Very special. Thank you. This weekend, I'm sponsoring a neighborhood job fair at Eagles Community Center, along with the Workforce Center at Mesa. So it's at the Eagles Center Friday, December 1st, 3 to 6, and Saturday, December 2nd, from 10 to 1. And it's an opportunity to connect with local businesses. In addition, we'll have services as helping you prepare a resume, access to professional attire, helping you prepare for an interview. There'll be a food truck, activities for the family, and lots of fun. So it'll be fun, as well as opportunities to look at what other jobs you have right here in Mesa. And, okay. We have Sunset Market coming this week. Sunset Market is today. We have a little market in downtown Mesa. There's Sunset Market 4 to 8 p.m. It's near the Christmas tree at McDonald. It's a reoccurring market on the third Thursday of the month, whatever. But it is happening today, fourth Thursday maybe. So check it out. It's all kinds of really cool local crafts and things for gift giving. So I think that's about it. Thanks.
Perfect. Anything else? Councilmember Summers? All right.
Thank you, Vice Mayor. I'm going to mention one thing. Yesterday, I provided testimony at the Arizona Corporation Commission on behalf of the city of Mesa for Project Pirate, which is the rail spur along the Pecos Advanced Manufacturing Zone. Happy to report that we were successful. The commission has voted unanimously to move the project forward. And I would like to thank Miranda DeWitt and her team for all the hard work and helping move this through the intergovernmental process.
Perfect. Thank you, Councilmember. Anything else? No? Mr. Brady, list of future meetings.
Thank you, Vice Mayor. I have some good news. We have 3 meetings left for this calendar year. So we'll be meeting Monday, December 4th, 5:15 for our council study session and council meeting. We'll have another study session on December 7th, and then our final council meeting of this calendar year will be December 11th, Monday, December 11th. Thank you.
Perfect. All right. Is there a motion to adjourn? Councilmember
So moved.
Or second by Councilmember Summers. All in favor, say aye.
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 We are adjourned. Thank you, everybody.